Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to our inaugural California Fire Science seminar series. So this is a new series that has been organized by the three speakers here today. Myself, I'm an assistant professor at the University of California, Berkeley. And Crystal and Jeanette, do you want to quickly introduce yourselves?
Sure. So I'm Crystal Colden. I'm a new assistant professor at UC Merced.
I'm Jeanette Cobeniguez. I'm also a new assistant professor at UC Merced.
And so the three of us are really excited to share this series with you. And the talk today is going to be sort of a broad overview of the wicked problem and the state of fire science in California. But before we get into the weeds, I really wanted to thank our sponsors for this series. This all started thanks to some nudging and push by Professor Tarek Zodi at UC Berkeley, who was able to organize a group together with funding from Berkeley Engineering and the Fire Research Group to start a seminar series just at Berkeley, which thankfully through the collaboration with UC Merced, we've been able to expand all across California. So we're very thankful to UC Berkeley, UC Merced for the support to offer this series, as well as the California Fire Science Consortium, especially Stacy Frederick, for her help in advertising the event and connecting us with some of the speakers and many of you who are viewing today. So with that, I would like to introduce Crystal, who is going to get us started in the presentation.
Thanks, Michael. And what we would like to do first, if Michael would forward the slide here. I think we can forward the slide.
The land acknowledgement is up on my end. Do you see it?
Uh-oh. No, we aren't seeing it yet. See, friends, this is why the organizers go the first week, so that we can work all of the technology and not take out these problems on our speakers that we are very delighted are going to be joining us over the course of the next few months. Hopefully Michael's going to be working this out here in a second. There we go.
I hope you see it. Okay, it just needed to be reloaded, so go ahead.
Okay, and we're in next slide mode, it looks like, so that we can actually see both the current slide and the next slide in the queue. There we go. All right, so we'd like to start by pausing to acknowledge all of the local Indigenous peoples who inhabit this land. And while we would normally try to acknowledge specific tribal groups, depending on where we're at, we see that our speakers, or excuse me, our participants are from all over the country. Our speakers are from different parts of California. So we want to acknowledge all of the people who inhabited this land, and we embrace their continued connection to the region and the country, and thank them for allowing us to live, work, learn, and collaborate on their traditional homelands. Let us take a moment of silence to pay respect to their elders and to all Indigenous people, past and present. Thank you very much. I think that's particularly important given the many discussions that we have and will be continuing to have around fire in Indigenous peoples. Next slide, please, Michael. So what we wanted to do today was try and sort of establish a state of the fire science for California. And we realize that many of you are from outside of California, and we hope that this will be beneficial for sort of talking about fire science more broadly, particularly since California right now and often seems to be the epicenter of fire activity in the country. Of course, when we're talking about fire science in California, we're not just talking about the sort of Western science that's been done. There's indigenous knowledge of fire on these landscapes for at least 15,000 years. And that knowledge continues today to be passed down through the generations, through the ceremony and cultural and oral histories. And it is still among us, and is the keepers of that knowledge are eager to put it back to use in these landscapes. In terms of Western science, the earliest Western science related to fire is really the start of the 20th century, and the U.S. Forest Service led the way in this in California, looking at how forest fires impacted these landscapes. And even as early as the first part of the 20th century, we have studies looking at how climate is related to forest fire in the state. Next slide, please. And of course, much of the early fire science that continues today in California is around this idea of ecology. What is the role of fire in the state? And some of the names that were critical in the early 20th century in terms of fire ecology and science are folks like Harold Weaver and Harold Biswell, often known as the Torch, and this idea of the relationship between fire ecology and conservation of some of these revered places and revered species, like the charismatic megaflora giant sequoia in California. So places like Yosemite and Sequoia Kings Canyon national parks were some of the places that were the earliest locations for 20th century fire science, and today continue to harbor some of the longest running and most expansive fire studies. Next slide, please. One of the things that we see when we look at fire science today is that it has generated from very much this sort of split throughout the 20th century and into the 21st between science that seeks to understand the ecology and asks these questions of how is fire beneficial in an ecological framework. And then the other side of it, of course, is how do we stop or suppress destructive fires? So a lot of the work that has been done looking at fire behavior and wildland-urban interface has very much been in that framework. Next slide, please. And of course, fire science in general, whether it's in California or beyond, is very much inseparable from a lot of these big events in suppression/disaster history. So in California, we have large disastrous events that are recorded in our archives, as early as the late 19th century in Santiago Canyon, and then many fires throughout the state, both north and south, across the last century, from a couple of fires in the Berkeley Hills in 1923, and then again in 1991, fire in Griffith Park in 1933 that killed, I believe, 29 people, fires in the 50s and 60s that produced numerous fire personnel fatalities, and then larger fires in recent memory that had hundreds to thousands of homes and structures lost. And of course, we've also seen in the last several years an increase in the number of civilians also killed in these fires. So these big fires tend to be, for many of you who are listening, who are in California, you may remember that there was a fire event that got you interested in fire, interested in doing science in this arena, or just interested in the management side. And that is, I think, common throughout the country. Most of us are associated or think about a specific event that got us interested or introduced us to the topic of fire. And that has definitely driven a lot of the science that we see over the years. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we're grateful for is that there's a lot of fantastic work being done to put historical information on the web, and the Wildfire project from University of California, San Diego, that's funded by NSF, is one of the many sources that has tried to put all the historical data in. And we can see that, in the first 130 years of this data set, there's a fair amount of fire across pretty specific regions of the state over and over again. And then if we look at just the last 10 years, next slide, please. What we see is that a lot of those same areas have been hit with fire, but that those fires are oftentimes much larger than the historical fires. And so this is part of the reason that we put this seminar series together, and why we're sort of giving this overview today is because of these types of changes that we're seeing and some of the really large fires. And I believe Michael's going to talk about this a bit more.
Thank you, Crystal. And so one of the questions that's incredibly pertinent today, certainly if you're in Northern or Central California and you look outside, what makes fire a disaster? And I come from an engineering background, and so very often we've thought of this very much as in terms of the destruction of structures, or specifically the loss of life and injuries in a fire. But the fact is that fires are natural inhabitants of a landscape. Not all fire is bad. And I think most of this audience, this is not something new that we're hearing. But the question is, what constitutes a fire disaster? We're not offering to answer that question, but I kind of want to pose, some of the possibilities and what we're thinking about broadly here. Is it, like I mentioned, home destruction? Is it lives lost? That certainly constitutes a disaster, because this is something that affects us individually as persons and as society. But there's also effects to ecosystems. If we lose ecosystems, not just to the natural environment, but also what about ecosystem services? Our clean air, clean water, recreational opportunities. Originally, when the Forest Service was formed more than 100 years ago, the focus was very much on preserving resources, thinking of trees within the forest as a resource, as a lumber resource. But we know that that's much broader than that. There's watersheds, and there are other things that we use these resources for. And also we depend on a clean and nice natural environment. The area burned, I think we'll see, has definitely been a threshold that has been crossed this year. And I'll show the numbers in a moment. Not to mention the mass exposure to toxic smoke. It's unfortunate, but we've been seeing these episodes in California particularly. Our definitions are not clear, but I think what is clear is that we've started to cross some thresholds in California. And what we have here was we're plotting, this is for the United States in general, two things. We have the area burned. So you see on the left-hand side, this black here, this is the area burned in terms of 100,000 acres per year. And below that, the number of fires per year. And the number of fires is almost going down, but kind of dramatically, the area burned is going up since 1985. And in particular, which is most chilling about this data, is that about 3% of the fires are responsible for the majority of this area burned. And so it's a smaller number of fires that's increasing in area. And as you saw in the plot that Crystal was showing, the graphic of California, many of the large fires that have been occurring are very, very large. And some of this says that we've been very good at suppressing fires during somewhat milder conditions. But it's during these extreme weather events, extreme drought, high winds, et cetera, where we're losing those fires. Those fires are growing very large. And as expected, the cost of suppressing those fires is increasing. And this is only the suppression cost. If we look more specifically at California, we see a very similar trend. The number of fires is almost going down at a very slow slope, but the acreage burned is going up. And again, it's a small number of fires, which is really driving this increase. I have replotted this graph 4 times this week, and yet still it's completely off. I have just left an arrow. And it's sad and somewhat devastating. This doesn't count, we're far past 2 million acres, not to mention Oregon has somewhere in the realm of 500,000 acres. So it just sort of demonstrates the condition we're in, that we're starting to move to a new regime here. Suppression costs have also increased in California, following a somewhat similar trend to federal costs. One of those measures we talk about is structures burned, and we talk about the wildland-urban interface, where wildlands intersect with natural vegetation. California has sort of been at the forefront of collecting this data. A lot of the federal data in blue is from ICS 209 forms, which have been collected. And I've collected this from a variety of different sources. It somewhat changes from source to source, but you can see the general trends. It's not a sort of distribution, but there have been dramatic events in the last couple of years, notably the Northern California fires in 2017 and the Camp Fire in 2018 that just sort of threw this off the charts. And California, as I said, has been at the forefront of collecting data because they've actually implemented now damage inspection teams. We'll hear about this towards the conclusion of our series by Chief at CAL FIRE, and they've actually been on the ground examining these structures so they can start to look at these loss patterns. The costs that I showed on the last slide were also, this included suppression. the total cost of fire is significantly more. And these are just some estimates from insurance, but something on the order of $14 to $16 billion for these very large events. Those are huge sums, and these communities are not all completely restored, so these costs still are growing. It's hard to put a number to it. And the thing you can't put a number to is the tragic deaths that have occurred. 22 in the Northern California fires, especially the Tubbs, and 85 in the Camp Fire. This also is a graph that I was trying to update several times, and I was lucky to be able to borrow this from Steve Bowen, who updated this today. I thought this was a nice way to show where we stand right now in terms of most destructive wildfires. We picked, there's 3 measures shown here: acreage burned, structures destroyed, and fatalities. And I think we're somewhat lucky perhaps this year that the structures destroyed and fatalities, while still tragic, pales in comparison to past fires. But this year in particular, it's the acreage burned that is just off the charts. If you see on the left, there are 6 fires right now that are in the top 20 most destructive California wildfires in terms of acreage burned in recorded history. There may have been more before we started recording these things, but these data go back quite a ways. And it's sort of a chilling reminder that things are changing. And Crystal's going to talk a little bit about the drivers of some of this dramatic change.
So all of you that are following or involved in the science, of course, or have just been listening to a lot of the news, are aware that there are sort of 3 big drivers that we talk about a lot associated with the trends and the increasing incidence of extreme fires. And first and foremost, above all of the sort of more minor players, I would call them, is climate change, of course. And climate change has a lot of different forms, right? It is the incidence of drought. And in California, of course, we had the 5-year drought from 2012 to 2017 that produced an enormous amount of forest mortality across parts of the state. We have associated with some of that beetles that are also contributing to vegetation mortality. And then, of course, what we've seen this year and other recent years where we've had large events and fatal events is extreme fire weather. Right, and the incidence of the extreme weather and the types of records that are falling, right? The frequency of those things and the magnitude of those things has all been pretty clearly and demonstrably linked to climate change, anthropogenic climate change. The second piece of the drivers of change is, of course, fire exclusion, a century of fire suppression that began really in the early 20th century on the federal side. And then even prior to that, of course, for 4 centuries since the Spanish arrived in California, there was also a suppression of indigenous cultural fire use. And the 2 types of fire suppression have yielded this broad scale buildup of trees and brush and all sorts of fuels that are now fueling a lot of these big fires, right? And then, of course, the third major driver of change is that the expansion of the wildland-urban interface, and there's a lot of discussion about what constitutes the wildland-urban interface, because what we're also seeing in California is many of these fires and many of the homes that are being lost are actually on the edges of cities, right? And so there's definitely this expansion of infrastructure and housing into the wildlands, but also that the wildlands are now right up against cities. And because of the vulnerability of these structures and the density of humans in these areas, we see this play of increased ignition sources and then potentially urban conflagrations in several of these recent fires. Next slide, please. To drive home sort of the climate change piece of that, a couple of recent figures from Abatzaglu and Williams, 2016. One of the things that came out of their paper is that a very large proportion of what we have seen burned in the last particularly the last 15 to 20 years, right, has been strongly associated with anthropogenic climate change. And this was a study that showed that we had from 1985 to 2015 about 4 million additional hectares, right, of fire that was essentially above and beyond what would have been expected without human-induced climate change. And when we look at the model projections for the future in terms of future projected area burned based on the IPCC's global climate model outputs, my colleague Leroy Westerling at UC Merced and his colleagues were the wildfire team for the 4th climate change assessment for California and produced these model outputs for the future. And I want to note that I added this little bar on here that shows where we're at today for 2020 area burned, right? We're just under 1 million hectares burned for the year, right? About 2.5 million acres. And that this is really putting us 20 to 30 years ahead of what some of the model projections showed for those extreme big fire years. Next slide, please. So part of what we want to do in this seminar series is really talk about how academia and the research that is done not only by academics, but all of our partners across sectors in a collaborative way, how that can begin to address this challenge that we face in living with wildfire. And, you know, there's some things that academia and academic research can do that we hope that all of our partners want to connect with us on, but then also our colleagues and collaborators across other academic institutes are thinking about as we come to the table to try and find solutions. And some of those things include things like studying past events and developing new knowledge, developing new technologies. And a big piece for academia is that we're always thinking about how we are training the next generation of fire managers and fire science researchers, right? And helping science inform management decisions so that we have science-driven policy and management. And a big piece of that, of course, is communicating with the public and with government. And of course, in the UC system, we have extension in the University of California Ag and Natural Resources program, or college, excuse me. And then, you know, really what we do in academia is we provide a science-driven perspective. And as someone who was a government employee for many years, that is definitely a difference some flexibility and freedom that we have in academia that allows us to do some of this work. Next slide.
So we want to give an example of some of the sort of collaborative efforts that can take place. And this is an example, just a quick overview of what was occurring in March just before the pandemic and lockdown sort of came. And this was a workshop that was hosted. Myself was part of the organizing, and Crystal and Jeanette were there, and sort of led to the formation of this seminar series and this collaboration. And we want to mention it because the purpose of this workshop was specifically aimed at looking at the resilience of wildland-urban interface communities. So this does not treat all of the fire issues, especially on the fire ecology side, but was specifically focused on communities due to the dramatic destruction that we've had recently. We were trying to look and bring together a diverse group. So academia was involved, but beyond academia, there were representatives from government, industry, tech, urban planning. We tried to bring in different perspectives, social sciences with engineers, and to get people talking and not just presenting what we're doing, but breaking out into groups and talking about immediate and realistic actions that we can do to resolve some gaps. And I'm just going to kind of talk about some of the things that came out of it, just as a preview of some of the things that hopefully we could try to continue to do together. And so the actions that came out of this, and I'll premise and say there will be a full report forthcoming. There's just been some delays with the current conditions. But we're really trying to say, what kind of things can we do now to make a difference? And it was overwhelming from all fields that sustained support is necessary. And we're not just talking about, funding from research, which is a common echo from academia, but we're talking about everything from outreach to facilities needs to outreach into prescribed fire. All of these efforts, including things like homeowner change and defensible space management, it's very important that they be continuous. If we start lagging for a number of years, think of the land management, fuels start to build up and it becomes much harder to catch up. And so trying to have that sustained support, the sustained training of fire professionals to fill these needs is very important, and unfortunately has been missing across all different spectrums in the past. Outreach is a given, but we can try to take outreach and engagement to new areas. I think one of the things that came out of that was how we can try to expand to different stakeholders. What about bringing real estate together with folks in academia and construction and insurance, and trying to bring the kind of information about wildfire risk, which we'll mention more in the research and development needs, put that together so that they can communicate that with home buyers. We start to make people aware of the issues and try to engage government into funding and legislating changes that can help reduce and mitigate those effects. Planning and mitigation in the bottom right go hand in hand. It's very hard to do the suppression activities on an extreme fire weather day, and we have to do this in advance. You can see that mastication is one form of mitigation shown here, but there are many ways we can do mitigation, whether that's inside communities or on the land management side. But we also need to plan these things. We need to look at the evacuation patterns, come up with standardized notifications and warnings, perhaps on a national scale. This has been identified as a huge problem leading to loss of life. We can work to streamline agency responsibilities. And there were even ideas about coming up. We definitely talk about defensible space. We talk about homeowner responsibilities. Can we come up with a homeowner rating system similar to LEED? LEED has taken off and been huge in the green building world, but we need that sort of large scale momentum in the wildfire side. And I think, especially from the engineering and tech side, technology helps support this. Can we use real-time data and sharing this data and different simulations to help inform not just real-time needs, but also event reconstruction and planning purposes? Risk maps were highlighted as a huge need, trying to identify risk and put resources where it's most useful, essentially getting the biggest bang for your buck in terms of mitigation. And trying to reduce redundancies in communication. Like I mentioned, the evacuation and notification was a huge need, leading to loss of life. Do we need to go back to hardwire in some communities, especially as we deal with PSPS power shutoffs? Coupled to that is the research and development needs. And I think that speaks a lot to the folks who are potentially on this webinar right now. From the research side, there are many different areas that I think we can try to work together to resolve some of this resilience in the wildland-urban interface. Infrastructure is one. You can see this doesn't just mean laboratories, though adding more laboratories would be hugely important to wildland-urban interface, in particular in the Ember side. But infrastructure, this is a fire weather truck from San Jose State. Evacuation is a huge area of research. Many people have perished while evacuating. And so like I mentioned, in terms of notification and evacuation, there's a really small community specifically focused on wildfire, and it would be great for that to grow. Risk quantification and cost just below that are intrinsically coupled. It's not just about assigning risk, but how do you use risk to try to inform changes? How can you look at which changes will make the largest impact, not just for a single structure, but for a community? It's often that single homes ignite and spread from home to home. And so the homes together are intrinsically linked within a community. And we have to think of the land management decisions, how those are tied to the structures and their vulnerability, and how it's tied to your neighbors. And how can we quantify those things to try to make cost-effective retrofits in as many places as possible? And then work with others to put that into legislation, to work with insurance and other quantities to essentially make this happen. In terms of the research needs, one of the biggest physical items is embers. So the small flying brands that are igniting structures in the wildland-urban interface still remain a large research need. Places like IBHS and NIST are doing a lot of research in that area, but California has been sort of central in terms of being impacted by this. and we should invest more in the topic. That couples with materials and trying to make not just materials, but whole structures more resilient to wildfires. And that includes the infrastructure, whether we talk about power or we talk about water and communications. Final two, modeling the wildland-urban interface. Our models are very much focused on wildland fire on the landscape. And we need to transition to these to where structures and people are. And last is essentially what we see out the window up here in Northern California today. There are incredible health impacts, not just right next to a fire, but long-term smoke impacts. And so we need to look at these emissions. What kind of impact is that having on health? I don't think these are included in a lot of the cost calculations that we think about at wildfire. And that may drive further work towards not just understanding health, but doing things to mitigate this incredible smoke impact. And this goes to introducing prescribed fire all the way to how we control fires.
So as Michael notes through that example that came out of the workshop in March, there is this really incredible need for interdisciplinary work. And for most of the people listening to this isn't going to be news. We've known for a long time that we need to be more interdisciplinary to assess these problems and to find solutions to these problems, right? Because trying to develop fire resilient, fire adapted landscapes is going to go far beyond engineering. We need landscapes that are managed holistically. We need to address cultural, political, economic barriers and have those be reduced so that we can implement the type of work that needs to be done. We need to address human dimensions, behavior, evacuations, notifications, planning processes, and as Michael noted, smoke, which if Californians had not been quite awake yet to the potential for a long, nasty smoke event prior to this week, they definitely are now. And of course, we've got not just smoke being a major public health concern, but water quality as well. There have been multiple events in the past several years, couple decades, in fact, where we have loss of water quality and boil water orders associated with wildfire events. And as these fires are impacting larger and larger municipalities, that becomes a much larger concern. And what this points to is that wildfire management, which historically, when we talk about the state of the science in California, historically was relegated very much to the wildlands, to the federal agencies who were in charge of those wildlands. Today, where we are at with the science and with the way that we have to implement that science in the system is that it really must be integrated across social systems, across ecological systems, physical systems, health impacts, economics, transportation, law, policy, and many, many more disciplines. And this is a figure from a recent paper that I am a co-author on. And one of the things that we wanted to try and show was that if we are talking about how we manage wildfire, we're really talking about how we manage an entire landscape that has wildfire as a component of that landscape at all different scales, across from the wildlands straight into the urban core, because those are the areas where you have a high density of people impacted by some of those smoke and water quality issues. Next slide, please. So this is part of why we wanted to bring researchers and interested parties from across California and really across the country together for this seminar series. Because what we wanted to look at is, if we know that we are going to have to improve our interdisciplinarity in the science and in the way we apply that science, we wanted to ask, what are some of our strengths and what are the places where we have opportunities to grow to improve the outcomes? So in California, one of the things that we looked at was, all right, where do we have enormous amount of history and a lot of strength in our fire science already? And there were sort of three key areas that overlap in many, many ways that we wanted to represent where some of that that strength was. And you as a listener may be a part of this, or you may be someone who is you know, in an outside area and you're interested in collaborating with folks either across the state or within or from an outside area, but within the state of California. So we wanted to paint where some of that strength is. Next slide, please. Of course, California, as I noted earlier, has a long history, and perhaps the earliest Western science done in the state is really focused in ecology and the management application side, and particularly in forestry, but more broadly as well, including rangelands. And we have enormous strength in this in Berkeley, in the Environmental Science Policy and Management School, the Bren School at UC Davis, or excuse me, UC Santa Barbara, UC Davis, UC Santa Cruz. Of course, our cooperative extension group, many of them also conduct research that is incredibly applied, and so that is a strength. And then of course we can't forget that our California State University schools have strengths as well. The forestry schools at Humboldt State and Cal Poly, and then we have a strong contingent at Cal State Chico. Also in California, of course, we have experimental forests, and Blodgett has been doing a lot of fire research for a very long time. The Sage Hen station on the east side, that's the partnership between Forest Service and Berkeley, has a long history of forestry and fire research. And then many of the UC reserves have had a small amount of fire research that, since several of them have burned in the last few weeks, I suspect we will see more of that type of research at the UC reserves in future, including the Yosemite Reserve at Wawone that is part of UC Merced. And then of course, you know, we have many, many, many non-academic research partners across the state. We wanted to point out that two of the big ones historically have been the Forest Service, the Pacific Southwest Research Station, and the Nature Conservancy. And I do want to say that, you know, for the three of us, this was an attempt to try and start thinking about who we knew had strengths in these areas. It is not a complete list by any means. So if you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, I should be on this list, or my group or my school should be on this list, we absolutely agree. This was sort of our first stab at it, and I'll get to that more in a second. So our first area of strength is really that ecology and management. The second area of strength across the state of California, where we would see a lot of national leadership, is in wildland-urban interface resilience and technology. We have burn labs and combustion groups at UC Berkeley, Merced, and at Riverside in collaboration with the Forest Service. And of course, we have the Wildfire group that I showed the map from earlier, and here's another map showing one of their products at San Diego, UC A&R. And then Stanford is also building a lot of capacity in this area. And once again, non-academic partners, the Nature Conservancy, Forest Service, these are strong long-term partnerships, but of course there are many, many others that are not noted here. Next slide, please. And then our third strength, one that is, I would say, probably one of the newest strength areas that is growing very rapidly, is on this idea of atmospheric conditions, emissions, and health, right? And of course, throughout California, we have multiple schools of public health at UCLA, at Merced. We have a health group at Stanford, and of course, UCSF is predominantly a medical school or a health policy school, and a group at UC Irvine that is very strong in atmospheric science and emissions. And of course, as Michael mentioned, the group at San Jose State University, which has long been a leader in atmospheric science and has now recently added a much broader disciplinary group that we're excited to see building up. So that is another area that is growing, and I personally hope to see more of. And I see folks noting in the chat that we should add things, and we'll get to that in just a second here. Next slide, please. So what we started doing a while back, and I think I've been working on this for a few months now, what we wanted to do was actually start building a network map, okay? And this is not even a remotely comprehensive map. You know, there are some names on here, there's some groups on here. Please, I beg you, do not be offended if you're not on here, because what this was a first stab at trying to build out a network, so that as people start to seek collaborators across the state and we start to build interdisciplinary research questions and collaborative teams, that there is a resource to go and find potential collaborators at other institutions and entities. And you'll note that right now, this only includes the universities, and it's predominantly the UCs, Stanford, and then a few of the Cal State institutions. But of course, there's a much broader collective of individuals that are working on fire or fire ancillary topics, right? Adjacent topics that are really important to getting to that holistically managed landscape, right, across the state. So what I would ask and what I would encourage everyone who is involved in this today is start thinking about where you might fit on a network map of fire science collaborators, whether you are doing fundamental science, whether you are doing more applied science, or whether you're a science communicator or user. How do you fit into this picture of developing an integrated and holistic science-driven fire group for California? What does that look like? And we will be reaching out to all the people who have registered for these series to try and actually fully fill out this map in future. And I'm desperately hoping that there's a better way to display these things, because I am not very good at visualizing stuff like this. So if there is anybody on this webinar that loves visualizing network maps, please shoot me an email. All right, so this is sort of the first step, and there's a lot of things going on.
So as Crystal and Michael have mentioned, some of the things we started considering in organizing the seminar was we're thinking about some of the strengths that we have in our state and across the nation in studying California-related fire behavior, and also thinking about interdisciplinary wildfire study. In addition, we have been very much attentive to thinking about cross-career stage collaborations, and our goal in designing part of the seminar lineup for the semester, for example, was to include folks from across different career stages and try to include as many early career stage faculty and researchers, such as that we can promote networking and collaborations that can maybe naturally occur as part of the participation in the seminar. We also thought about the different types of diversity that we could have within the seminar, including a diversity of ideas and a diversity of people. With that, I think that the discussion section that we decided to include also prioritize the inclusion of graduate students and postdocs. And we really wanted to emphasize the thought of how do we train the next generation of fire scientists, and that includes not only graduate students, but postdocs and junior faculty. So we hope that in the discussions, we can really start brainstorming about what are the programs, what are the initiatives that already exist and we should give visibility to, or that should be formed and produced as we collectively think about them. So we also hope that early career folks and graduate students are able to participate and become part of this established fire science community. So all of this is just to highlight how we've been thinking about this seminar as a place to create space for everyone, and in particular for early career folks. Now, next slide, please. Yeah, so with that, in designing the seminar, we came up with a potential list of areas of growth for fire science in our region. And we hope that throughout the seminar, we can discuss what these areas of growth are. One of, this is a brief list, of course, that we came up when we were discussing, but one of the areas that we discussed a lot was the area of public health, and whether that's an area of growth or there's an area that requires more visibility and that's already existing. So we hope that through discussion, we can come up with these lists and come up with different strategies such that as a community, we can promote growth in these areas. Next slide, please. Next slide. This is the great lineup that we have for our seminar for the rest of the semester. We have folks from across different fields, as you will see, everywhere from fire behavior to larger scale fire behavior analysis. So we hope that all these presentations will really foster a conversation and discussion of the different, from different perspectives in our field. And of course, following each of these talks, we'll have these discussions, these open discussions, and including today, we'll have a great discussion following up, and the link should be showing up on the chat because we will have a separate session for the discussion. With that, I will hand it over to Michael and Crystal.
Thank you, Jeanette. So this pretty much concludes the presentation. Again, all of these are posted on the seminar webpage, which is also available at the Fire Research Group, frg.berkeley.edu. And so you can review the upcoming seminars. We're also slowly in the process of adding everyone who registered. Unfortunately, we can only add 100 per day due to the Berkeley listserv regulation, but we will continue to add everyone to the listserv so that you get updated for the upcoming seminars. So with that, thank you so much. We are going to take a couple questions and we'll end on the hour and switch to the discussion section afterwards. So Crystal and Jeanette, did you want to take one of the questions? And I encourage you, if you have any questions, please type them in. There's the Q&A. It looks like two little bubbles on the top. Go ahead and send us any questions if you have. Maybe I'll read a first question from Megan Fluke, who is representing an environmental advocacy organization, and particularly on land use issues. Was wondering, how does an advocacy group become part of the solution and path forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that, you know, advocacy in general has a major role in everything that we do in this country, right? And so for fire science and sort of holistic fire management and living with fire in these landscapes, you know, part of what is the first step if you are an advocacy group is figuring out what are the best links to your mission, right? If you're, I'm going to assume you're a nonprofit, but you may not be. But for many of the outside entities that are wondering, okay, well, we know that this concerns us somehow, right? And there's so many different types of research going on. There's so many resources that are out there that sort of identifying what aligns with your mission statement is a good first step. Because the thing is that as scientists, you know, a lot of us tend to be focused on defining problems and trying to sort of think about what the next steps could be, but we're really focused on problem definition. And then, it's groups like government entities like NGOs and advocacy groups that then take that science, right, and help push it to the policy side, to the government side, in the areas that they need. And if I think that anybody who wants to be a part of a solution like this can be, and having that sort of strength in numbers approach is certainly useful. I've seen a lot of great NGOs and a lot of great community groups that get really involved in fire management and trying to improve conditions for their community, for their particular area of interest, that have done a lot of really great good. So absolutely yes, these sorts of groups have a role to play.
So there was also a question we received via email, which was asking what role has been determined in terms of the buildup of dead downed fuels. And I think we are actually they just typed it in. It's from Daniel Matthews. What observations can be made at this point about the effect of massive beetle mortality on the behavior of the creek fire? Has it shown mass fire effects as predicted by Scott Stevens et al. In 2018? Now that you've had a data analyzed.
So I recall saying this in email earlier. The challenge, of course, with any individual event like the creek fire is that it becomes a difficult and long-term process to try and disentangle specific drivers. And to be quite blunt, the creek fire isn't over yet. We're still right in the middle of it. So it would be very disingenuous to even try and say anything. We don't know what the fire effects are on the creek fire yet. We still don't have any sort of idea, what different types of fire behavior there was. I live about 40 miles away from the creek fire, and like everybody else on here, I've just seen what's on the news. I haven't actually been up to that landscape because it's still all closed. So that's a great question for future work, but at this point, there's not really any not really any way to answer that question.
So another question coming in from Stephen Rosenthal. He leads a large volunteer group doing restoration in a local park. They have very high fuel loads. Are there some best practices for fuel management that can be doable at the small scale?
So I think a lot of the questions that I see in the Q&A are asking about what are the types of things that you can do, right? Whether it is with county planning, whether it is interest in local parks or communities. I think that one of the best resources is, well, there's two really great resources that I want to note here. First of all, anybody that's looking for sort of what can I do locally, right? One of the best sources we have is the National Fire Protection Association's FireWise program. And they have a fantastic website. They have a ton of resources that are really geared towards answering those questions about what can I do locally around my home, in my community, with my county and sort of the powers that be in that place, right? And if you're not familiar with the FireWise program, I strongly encourage you to have a look at it. Within the state of California, UC Extension has done a fantastic job of putting together those same types of resources specific to California and our diversity of climates and ecosystems, right? And so looking at the UC Extension's fire website, and I apologize, I don't know it off the top of my head, they have an enormous amount of resources. They have a whole host of webinars that have been recorded that are on there and are available for people to go and look at and sort of try and find what works for them. Are you in an area where it's predominantly grasslands or an oak woodland savanna? Are you in forest? Are you in the chaparral shrublands of the South? And you can find the specific types of recommendations and videos of experts locally talking about that on the ground and how you implement such things on that UC Extension page.
So there was another question about whether we'll be discussing the way county planners approve new construction in high fire risk areas. And I guess I can address, I don't think we'll go specifically on that question, but there will be some talks. Courtney Schultz will be talking about policy and land management, which I think relates somewhat. She's coming from Colorado, but there's a lot of overlay to what we do in California, and I think she's looked at that. There's also going to be a talk from Chief Steve Hawks, who runs the engineering division of CAL FIRE. And while that talk will be focused on the damage inspection program and destruction, I think they'll mention a little bit about what's going in that regulation area. And I would mention that I know that in terms of fire risk areas, Dave Sapsis and others at CAL FIRE are in the process of updating those maps. And there are several pieces of new legislation I don't know much about, but they're either passed or going through related to that area. So there's probably going to be some changes in the near future.
I do see we have a couple of questions about planning and sort of this issue of county planners. We don't currently have a speaker lined up specifically about this question, and this is, of course, a much larger question about planning and the policies around new development in the state. And one of the things that we are hoping is that we are able to continue this seminar series into 2021, and we will certainly look for opportunities to find speakers to address this topic and this question, because it is an important one that a lot of folks are asking, and this is really helpful. A lot of these questions are pointing to areas that we don't have speakers for yet, and that we want to try and identify who some of those folks might be so that we can have these topics addressed. I also see a question from Michael Wara. Hi, Michael, at Stanford. And he asks about bringing tribal knowledge regarding land management and cultural fire into research on fire and practice on fire management outside of tribal lands. We actually have tried pretty hard to identify a speaker to come in and talk specifically about cultural burning and Indigenous knowledge. And because of a whole host of things, as many of you are also dealing with COVID and whatnot, we were not able to get someone for 2020, and we're very much hoping that we will have a colleague of ours at UC Davis speak in 2021 specifically on tribal and Indigenous cultural burning. And I feel
I want to address,
got a couple minutes. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
I want to address a real quick one. There were several questions from international collaborators, some folks at Oregon State, Babak. I just want to say that, these seminars are open to all. I think when we go through the map, there's some sort of push. We're trying to get everyone in California connected, but there's certainly nothing restricting that. So we definitely encourage you to contact us to get added to that, and hopefully we'll find some way to add that perhaps as an external map. There's obviously so many collaborators, and there's an international network that's far beyond what we can do. But we would like to highlight those collaborations that link to California and the resources that are available. So we do encourage you to get in touch and add yourself to that list and stay on for the discussion following this.
And I'll say as a last note here that one of the things that inspired this seminar series, from my perspective, for me, is that the Australians have created a network of fire science researchers and those that are associated with fire science research across the multitude of universities, and of course CSIRO is their government research institute in Australia. And so they have been working on building that network for some years. And we don't really have an equivalent in the US. And part of the discussion for the three of us in building this seminar series is that we would like to see that sort of networked fire science group exist in the US so that we can develop a lot of these interdisciplinary collaborations much more easily.
So we've hit the top of the hour, and I think there's still some great questions. but maybe we will take these to the networking session to be respectful of everyone's time. Hopefully everyone got that. I sent out a link. I will send it out one more time once I finish talking and start the networking session. The difference, this is a recorded webinar. We will be posting it to our website and to a YouTube so that it can be streamed and watched later. But we will also be having this open networking session, which will not be recorded. And that session will be available soon after. So we're going to be starting that right now. So please, I encourage you to do that. And on that one, you will have video and microphones so that we can have more of a discussion on these questions. And thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you all very much for attending. And next week, our next speaker, I don't actually remember who our next speaker is. Do we have our last, can you bump up 2 slides, Michael? There we go. Neil LaRoe from University of Nevada, Reno. So we will hopefully see many of you next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.